So my job today is to talk to you a little bit about the Perkins, how we came about and what we do, and more importantly to highlight for you what your support means. So bear with me and we'll take you through just a few slides. So one of the things I do like to do is just let people know why we're called Harry Perkins. When I started here 5 years ago, I had no idea who he was. And then I thought, well, he's got his name on 2 research buildings, he's probably a researcher or somebody in the scientific world. And of course, I soon found out that I was wrong on both counts. He was actually a farmer from Bruce Rock here in WA, was also the inaugural chairman of Wesfarmers, very astute businessman and incredibly community-minded. And it was when Harry actually came across, and I'll say they were young back then, they probably are more silver-haired vintage now, but he came across 2 young Peters. Peter Clinton, who was our first director, and is now WA's chief scientist, and Peter Liebman, who's our current director. And these 2 young researchers had set up something called Waymar, and we're talking 22, 23 years ago now. And their focus was looking at research, but looking at it in terms of how disease impacts on adults. We know we've had a very strong legacy here in WA with telethon looking at how diseases present in children. Nobody doing much in the adult space. So the 2 Peters established Waymar, WA Institute of Medical Research, over here in Charlie's, also an annex at Royal Perth and on the grounds of UWA. But research back in those days was done in a very different way to today. If you worked in heart disease, you only ever spoke to people in a heart disease lab. If you were working in cancer, your teams tended to stay in labs that were focused on cancer. When they met Harry, Harry said, we need to change the game. We need to actually give the people of Perth a world-class medical research facility, and I can help you do that on the condition that everything you do is done collaboratively. So we want to set up labs where people are actually working with a team working in heart disease can be sitting alongside a team that work in, say, diabetes. We want it to be in the grounds of the QE2 facility so that you've got access to places like PathWest. You've got access to other research facilities being housed within your building. So that was the game plan. And then Harry did what I like to refer to as a medical miracle. He got government to part with money. Anybody who can do that, pretty good. So Harry got on board. Obviously, Wesfarmers came on board with the Cusker Foundation, Lottery West, and we got this magnificent building built and our sister site down at Fiona Stanley. And then when we were due to open this building up in 2014, we'd unfortunately lost Harry at that point due to lung cancer. So his family were approached and asked if we could rename to become the Harry Perkins Institute of Medical Research in honour of him and the legacy he's left all West Australians with. We also still had very strong connections with the family. Harry's lovely little granddaughter, Hannah, actually fundraises for us, which is just adorable. She's doing our walk this year alongside Mum. So the family connection continues. So everything that you see that has the Perkins name on it, that's actually based on Harry's signature. I think it's really cool. I also think it's great that he had a signature we could read. It was me that did the scribble building and nobody didn't know who we were about. So that's how we've come about. So we are WA's leading adult medical research facility. And we like to say we're a local organisation with global impact. So WA sometimes stands for wait a while, as we all know. We're one of the most isolated capital cities in the world, but we are punching well above our weight in the research stakes. So we have collaborations happening in 97 cities, 29 countries and across 6 continents. So we're making really good inroads on that global scale, and I'll talk to you about some of the things we're doing in that. We are a registered charity. So Harry got us the building. We have to actually keep them going, and that's where what you have done for us, we cannot thank you enough. You are keeping research going. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for enabling the research that happens in this building to continue. You do make that possible. Okay, so we always talk about research as about us. That really didn't register with me until a few years ago. And the reason I say it is about us is the one thing every single person in the known universe has in common with their fellow man is one of these. We all have a body. Mine's fabulous. I've had it for a long time, but every now and then our bodies can go wrong. And what the Perkins does is looking at not only when our bodies go wrong and what we can do, but how can we prevent them from going wrong in the first place? So it really is a personal thing. We can't go to a pharmacy and get the latest treatments for our high blood pressure or our gout without some clever boffins in a research lab actually coming up with those in the first place. So it really is personal. And the sorts of things we do here is we're investigating those diseases that affect us all. So the big ticket ones are cancer, and in particular we have a focus on cancers that are difficult to get good outcomes from. So think things like triple negative breast cancer and brain cancer, just two of them. We also investigate things like diabetes. And what I love about the people who work here is they're out-the-box thinkers. So what we're doing in terms of diabetes is not just looking at high and low sugar levels and the impact on the body, but there's research underway that's looking at, well, hang on, is there a genetic link with diabetes? Why does one person get it and somebody else doesn't? So is there a genetic reason why their bodies cannot regulate those sugar levels? So that's a really interesting way of looking at diabetes. We have a lot of work going on in heart disease. If anybody's been down to Fiona Stanley, and you've seen our sister site down there, there's a lot of work being done by Garesh and his team down there in heart disease. And to me, I have the absolute joy of driving the Coburn car park, which used to be a Coburn freeway, the Quinana freeway, every morning, and I come past that building and I do a very heartfelt thank you. And the reason I do that is when we talk heart disease, we're not just talking this, we're talking that whole system of how blood, etc., goes through our body. So there's research going on into stroke and Alzheimer's there as well. And in 2010, I went to get out of bed one morning, left side of my body went, I know what to do with this, I've done it every morning for X number of years, and the right side of my body went, not happening today. So I dragged myself to the bathroom mirror, and I do mean I dragged. I don't always wake up looking this fabulous. Sometimes it takes a little bit more work. And that particular morning I thought, oh, I look absolutely rubbish because the whole right side of my face had dropped. And I worked out that my arm wasn't working properly. So I had a stroke. I was fortunate. I had a mini stroke, but I got a bit greedy and I went on to have quite a few in a short space of time. So I had testing done, etc. We know what's causing mine because of what's happening in research. Touch wood, because of the medications I'm on, the follow-up testing I have, the scans that are done, I haven't had another TIA since 2010. And that's thanks to the research work that actually happens. It also gives me a great bit out of jail-free card and family argument, because I can throw down my brain scans and go, at least I can prove I've got one. So that's great. So we're doing work in that area. The other area that's really interesting is actually looking at rare genetic diseases, and in particular those that play havoc with muscular development. And we have got two of the most unbelievable people working at the Perkins in that area. Two in particular head up a team looking at that, and that is one is the amazing Prof Nigel Ladd. If you've ever heard Nigel talk, he is hilarious and interesting. And he, the head of that lab now is the lovely Judi Ravenscroft. And Gina actually just took out a 40 under 40 award for her work in rare genetic diseases. And between the two of them, they have been able to give families answers for the first time in an entire family history. Because some of these genetic diseases can be so rare, your family may be the only one in the world affected by it. A little bit different, if you've got heart disease, we have a whole lot of history and a whole lot of patient caseloads and data from vast areas of the population, unfortunately, that we can compare and look at. When we're talking rare genetic diseases, if you're the only family in the world that suffers from that, it's pretty hard to work out what's gone wrong. So Nigel and Gina have been able to give family answers for the first time in years. So it's really exciting work that's happening here. We want to get better methods of diagnosis, because if we can diagnose sooner, we can treat sooner, and hopefully we get better outcomes. So there's some really interesting work on looking at how can we actually prevent almost before it becomes a problem. And I'll tell you about some of those as well. We want to make treatments better with the aim of making disease non-fatal. and I stress non-fatal. We'd love to say cure. But if we think about cancer in particular, for every cell we have in our body, there is the potential for that to become cancerous. So cancer is not one disease, it's multiple. And even in particular types of cancer, there are multiple variations. So brain tumours, for example, it may be anaplastic astrocytoma or a glioblastoma, it may be a meningioma. So all of these will present differently. And because we're all unique, some of us more unique than others, our DNA is unique, how we respond to a cancer will be very different to our fellow human being. This is where personalised medicine and targeted therapies for each individual are becoming such an important role. So if we can do non-fatal, that's a pretty good stopgap. If we think back to the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, if you were diagnosed with AIDS, it was a death sentence. AIDS has now been listed as non-fatal. That's what research has done. And in fact, in the last 2 years, 2 people have been killed. So it did not happen in this lab here, unfortunately. But that's great. And then the last thing we want to do is support our community. So we have a lot of public forums that we do. We have our open days, we have education programs running. Knowledge is power. So if we can let you know what's happening here, that helps you make informed decision and choice as well. Making sense? Yeah. Good. The next thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk to you about 4 people. I will give you just a little heads up. I will be talking about people who have passed away. And the reason that I do this is they are a really good example of where we were, where the research has gone, so how we have developed, and where we need to go in the future. So this is not done to distress anyone, but it's done hopefully so we can kind of all get that understanding of the importance of where we're at. Okay, so the first gentleman is a gentleman by the name of Norm, West Coast Eagles supporter. No, go Dogs. Very much a family man, loved a good barbecue. Diagnosed with lung cancer just after his 70th birthday, and then passed away a few months later as a result of that disease. We do things in collaboration here. We provide laboratory space for other organisations. We have the National Centre for Asbestos-related Diseases housed in our building. So it's lovely to think we've got a collaborative space going for those sorts of things. The next one is a young gentleman by the name of Glenn. When I talk to high school students, and we see about 3,500 a year, and we talk about melanoma, and I say to them, what age bracket do you think melanoma you will find some high statistics in? They'll go, oh, 40s, 50s, 60s. And the actual stats are, if you're between the ages of 15 to 39 and you are diagnosed with cancer, it's highly likely to be melanoma. This young man was 14 when he was diagnosed. And we're talking about 25 years ago, which is why it's a great example for where we've come. So melanoma for Glenn was actually in his neck. So he had everything surgically removed through here. Very impressive scar. And it would depend on who he was talking to on the day as to how the scar came about. So maybe if you'd seen my lovely friend Marilyn and you thought, she looks a bit all right, you might have said, oh, Marilyn, that's where shark bit me. If it was a young man, and I'm sorry, what's your name? Ishan? Yeah. And he was doing my macho's more macho than your macho, the story might have been, oh, that was from a knife fight. So always a good story. Surgical removal, still gold standard treatment. We aim to remove as much tumour as possible. Unfortunately for Glenn, melanoma came back when he was in his 30s. So at 35, he failed to turn up for work one day. Anybody been to Darwin? If you've been into the actual Parliament House up there, responsible for a lot of the woodwork that was in there. Didn't turn up for work one day. His mates went around to find him. He was actually on the floor of the flat and he had his seizures. Well, unfortunately, melanoma back, straight to the brain. 3.5 months, diagnosed and passing away. What we now know, thanks to research, is that for 40% of melanoma patients, we now know there is a particular gene that we all carry, and in these patients, there is a particular 1-point change in how their DNA is set up that actually triggers their melanoma. So what it does is it actually keeps the cells replicating and duplicating and going crazy, doesn't shut them down. That's what causes their cancer. So these 40% of melanoma patients have gone on to targeted therapies. It doesn't cure the cancer, but it slows that rapid tumour growth down and it buys them valuable time. That's incredible to think. That's happened in the last 20 years. And I've been very fortunate to meet two beautiful young people who are long-term melanoma survivors as a result of that breakthrough. And when we talk about the people power in Perth, people power actually enabled the Perkins in the last 12 months to bring an amazing researcher by the name of Jonas over from Europe. He is a world leader in melanoma research. He is now Team Perkins, which is incredible. So Perth people helped that happen, which is amazing. The next one is a lovely lady by the name of Billy. Loved a good beer, loved a good story, never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. Diagnosed with breast cancer not long after her in her late 50s rather, and then eventually decided to stop treatment because the disease had metastasised and treatment was worse than the actual disease itself. Passed away not long after her 60th birthday. We now have a 95% success rate for long-term survivorship in breast cancer due to research. You're going to hear from Pilar later on, who is just a goddess in my book, who's doing amazing work in the area of those hard-to-treat breast cancers. We have some amazing technology that's been developed here that is just blows my socks off every time I think about it. I'm going to talk to you about that. So there's a lot of work going on in breast and ovarian cancer here in the building. You will see a sea of pink and purple hitting the streets in a few weeks' time for our Women's Walk to Conquer Cancer. So that's an area of real interest. Big fella on the end, a gentleman by the name of Nick, teacher of gifted and talented students here in Perth, Mensa level intellect, didn't join Mensa because I don't do clubs, bit of a quirky character. He was actually going to do some of the education stuff with Perkins, saw the building when it was first opened up. Unfortunately, was overseas, had gone to Norway to see the Northern Lights for his 60th birthday. And as he said, the only thing he got to see were the hospital lights. He was diagnosed with something really fancy called an anaplastic astrocytoma, fancy word for brain cancer. Passed away after a 3-year battle. Hilarious character. Would go into all of his appointments wearing his own brain scan on T-shirts, with sayings that he had made up himself. So please excuse my language, but one of them was butter. That headache really was a brain tumour. The other one was his take on a souvenir T-shirt. Some of you may have seen my Nana went to Singapore and all I got was this T-shirt. He designed his own up that had the Norwegian flag on it, and the saying was, I went to Norway and all I got was brain cancer. And the reason he did that was he wanted conversations to happen. We've had no change in outcomes for brain cancer survivorship in 30 years. We have the amazing Ruth Gans here. One of her missions is to look at how do we get chemotherapy into some of these really hard to treat tumours where they throw up a really hard venous system that actually can stop therapies getting in. So she's looking at how do we actually crack that to be able to get therapy into some of these tumours. So some really exciting work. So they're good examples of where we were, where we're headed, and where we want to go to next. They're also a really good example of when I say research is personal. Norm was my dad. Glenn was my baby brother. Billy was my birth mum. And the big fella on the end was my husband. And I often get people going, oh, but I want you to stop and think. Every single one of you in this room, without even having to think hard about it, will know at least 2, 3, 4 or more people in your world who've been affected by disease. We all do. Everybody does. It's personal. It's absolutely personal. Okay, so what are we doing about it? We have the delightful red hair. Think of the red hair and the piercing blue eyes, and a lovely Irish lilt. Brendan's team were looking at how we can reduce repeat surgeries. One of the things that we do know is that sometimes when people go in to have cancer surgery, the surgeon will actually look at taking out the cancer, and then around the edges of that, they want to get a safe margin. And we know that for some patients there is a recall because that safe margin wasn't met. I've done this talk, I cannot tell you how many times over the last couple of years. And this came home to me 4 weeks ago with full force because I went in to have a breast cancer removed. Surgeon took out what they hoped was going to be the safe margin. I went home and I waited for the phone call. And unfortunately, I fell into one of the 30% of people who get a phone call to say, we're sorry, the margins didn't come back clear. You need to have a second surgery. So my thoughts were, Brendan, I want your thing that you are doing, that you are developing, because that's what Brendan's trying to prevent. So what they did was they took the technology that is used to analyse tissue samples, and they said, can we scale that down to have a machine that we can take into surgery to see how that works, to see if we can actually have it done in surgery, that analysis, if the surgeon then needs to take more tissue out, they can there and there. Let's reduce repeat surgery. This is what they came up with. Benchtop model, it measures the elastography of tissue, it looks at histology, etc., and they can get real-time feedback as to whether or not do we have that safe margin. They wanted to take it a step further. They asked engineers to scale it down, make it easier to handle. Looks like a petrol pump. It's the coolest bit of petrol pump tech ever. The idea with this is the surgeon will hold that in their hand. After excision, they will run this around the cavity, see what is left behind and see if they've got that safe margin. This won design awards for innovation here in Australia. They then took it to pitch at the Palace at Kensington. I did not get an invitation at coffee before was in point. Dirty on that. It won awards over there. It's now in clinical trials down at Fiona Stanley. The IP belongs here, WA, Perkins. People power helping get this up and running. But they want to take it even further. I get goosebumps on this one. This is that big technology here, scaled right down. That's going to fit inside a surgeon's glove. So it's going to be a smart glove. The surgeon will simply do this and map that tumour in theatre. How cool is that? So the applications for this won't just be they're trying it in breast cancer currently, but this has applications across so many other forms of cancer. It's going to revolutionise how surgery is done. Hopefully it's going to stop those repeat surgeries being needed. Financial, emotional, physical costs reduced. People power backing it. Thank you. Okay. Lovely Garish, I spoke about him before, who's working down in Southwood on heart disease. What they're looking at is we know what to do when someone's had a heart attack, but wouldn't it be fantastic if we could prevent it before it even happened? So they are using artificial intelligence, computer speak basically, gathering as much information as they can from patient scans, records, testing, etc., and seeing if they can come up with a predictive test. They can look, sorry. Told her I could talk the mouth on was on the water until my throat goes dry. So what they're wanting to be able to do is if they can have a look at someone's arteries, thank you, have a look at someone's arteries and predict whether or not they're going to get anything breaking off the walls and causing blockage before it even happens. Prevent rather than treat, which I think is incredible. The other thing they've been looking at too was looking at whether or not there's greater impact for patients who have COVID, because we do know that sometimes when people have underlying heart conditions and they get a bad dose of flu or pneumonia, that can have an impact. So they're looking at that as well. So really exciting work. Dr. Mark Middle and Prof. Peter Thompson, who are two of the most lovely, lovely gentlemen here, they're doing a lot of work in the heart area as well. And one of their big areas of interest was looking at whether or not we can repurpose existing medicines. Because one of the greatest costs to us as end users is in the development of new drugs. So to give you an idea, to get one new drug to market costs $2.6 billion. One drug, $2.6 billion. Who pays for it ultimately? We do. So Mark and Prof Thompson have been looking at, are there existing drugs out there that we can repurpose? So we know they're already on PBS, all of the testing's been done, all of the development's been done, good to go. We don't have to actually have that expense. And they've been looking in particular at a drug called colchicine, which has actually been used to treat gout for many, many years. And just last year, they had a paper accepted in one of the leading magazines where all researchers want to get papers published. Once your paper is published, it means your contribution to the scientific world has been recognised. It's the tick of approval. As our young researchers would say, that's their street cred. So this has now been approved that colchicine is proving for about 30 to 40% of heart patients to have beneficial effects. Colchicine works on inflammation, and that's what gout is. It's an inflammation process. When someone has a heart condition and they get something breaking away from the wall of the artery, that's been caused often by inflammation. Colchicine working to stop that, quite incredible. So that repurposing has absolute benefits for us as consumers. So just some ideas there of what's been done in that space. And people want to know what we're doing in the COVID space. One of the things that we did from the get-go was look at, okay, what can our contribution be? We're extremely lucky that we have a clinical trials facility as part of the Perkins. And that company's name is Linear. Linear are one of the only clinical trial facilities that managed to stay open throughout the height of the pandemic. Because of their protocols, because we do have that lovely clinical isolation here in WA, whoever thought that that was going to be a boom? Back when we, I used to mention, oh, we're so far away from everything. I'm quite glad we're so far away from everything now. So they were able to actually keep running. And they're now in partnership with a multinational pharmaceutical company called Clover. And Clover are well renowned for vaccine development. So we actually had a clinical trial happening here for a COVID vaccine in the Philippines. They asked for 200 applicants when they were starting up, and they got over 2,000. So people power and Perth getting behind it is fantastic. The other thing that we're offering too is frontline support, and this was a no-brainer for anybody working here, particularly those who had medical degrees on top of their research degrees or vice versa. Hands up straight away. We're in it for the long haul. We're here to do whatever we can, and our director, Peter Leitman, has had some really good inroads, insights, and influence in being able to assist what Perth may do if the pandemic actually does break out. So it's really lovely to know that's happening here in WA. So when we talk about how research is funded here, we have fundraising that happens. I'll tell you a bit about some of those. We have sponsorship, obviously. We talked about West Farmers, Lottery West. We have Macca who come in and sponsor our bike ride every year. We also have grants, and Pilar at the moment would have loved to have been here today, but she is in grant writing mode. And at that time of year, the only thing I'll ever say to a researcher is, do you need chocolate or a coffee? Because unfortunately, there's about 3 months of the year where they have to write grants, applications for grants. Goes through the NHMRC. There is no guarantee they will get grant money to keep their research going. So sometimes we have to make hard decisions. And that's where these other things of fundraising, sponsorship and donations plays a huge, huge part. So grant money does come in. We are lucky. We do tend to do better than a lot in terms of grant funding. However, in 2020-21, guess where a lot of government grant money has gone? COVID. You know, as it should. We don't want the pandemic to keep going, but it means we have to now look at other ways of keeping our research happening. The other area is donations and planned giving. So some of you do donation to us on an annual basis. Some of you may do it on a monthly basis as members of our Spark program. When Nick passed away and I stopped and had to do that awful thing of rewrite my will, which I really wasn't expecting to have to do, I stopped and thought, well, what can I do? I need to do something. So one of the things I thought about was I thought about my family. I thought about what's my legacy. I love my cat, but I decided my cat is going to live on biscuits instead of high-end cat food. So I've actually left a portion of my escape to the Perkins for research. So that's our lovely Silver Linings Club, and that's just my way of being able to carry the family legacy forward and to make a difference for other families. So there's lots of different ways. And I apologise for this image, it's pretty small, but to give an idea, a $20 donation buys 100 test tubes. So even small donations make a huge impact. A $400 donation buys a micro pipette, which is their main tool of work. It's like a mechanic spanner. So we need those. And the reason it's super important is down the bottom here, we have this lovely figure. Let's see if I can get this working. Fantastic. $5,493 per day to run a lab. That is just the lab. That's not the salaries. The Perkins has over 20 labs. Research is expensive. Not to do it, even more expensive. So the contributions you have made, incredibly valuable, absolutely critical to the work we're doing here. And then finally, sometimes people want to know how else can we get involved? And there's a number of things we let people know about. So people can commit to a fundraising event. I talked about our women's walk. This year, instead of having to do the walk on one day, so that 35K and 42 if you're doing the full marathon length, people can walk it over a number of different days. They can do 5Ks a day, which is really lovely. People can do our 200K bike ride. Not me. I'm not designed for walking, I'm designed for talking. I'm not designed for riding, I'm designed for talking. These are both amazing events. So the 200 bike rides from here down to Mandurah and back over a weekend, they're the most amazing things to be part of. So even if you're not a bike rider or a walker, you can cheer squad. You can support, you may know people who are already in those events. So get behind them and support them. You can also do your own events. I've met some of the most beautiful people who have said, I've got an idea, I want to do a such and such to raise money for the Perkins, can we do that? And the answer is yes. And we've got gorgeous Yoki down the back who's heading up community fundraising, so people can do that. You can volunteer at any of these events as well. People are always welcome to come along and help out. Visitors, we've done that, fantastic. Come back and see us on open day. Come back in and have a lab experience with the Biodiscovery Centre crew. We can put you in lab coats for a 2-hour session. Donate is easy to say. That's always easy to say. Please put your hands in your pockets. You're doing that already. Thank you for that. Whether it be through Spark or Silver Lining or making a donation in a time frame that suits you, it's incredibly important. You can donate your time. You may have an idea that you want to donate, and probably this one down the end is the one that costs people nothing, but it's so valuable to us, and that is your word of mouth. Talk to people about us. We're still constantly surprised that people don't know we can or what we do. The fact that we're West Australian, working for West Australians in a time when there's so many asks on people from all over the world to donate to charities, the fact that we're West Australian is really, really strong in my heart, and I know it is for a lot of other community people I talk to. So please, donate your word of mouth. Thank you for the support you've given us. We really do appreciate it. I'm going to hand it over in a moment. We're going to get Pilar up, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of introduction to this amazing woman. So Pilar has received countless awards over the years, including those from the Department of Defence Breast Cancer Program, the American Lung Association, several Cancer Nanotechnology Awards. She's won NCI and NIHS Awards. She's a Cancer Council of WA Research Fellowship and an ARC Future Fellowship Award winner, and she's also a National Breast Cancer Novel Concept Award winner. And as I said, she can't physically be with us because of the grant writing process, but her lab is responsible for transforming the way cancer is prevented, detected and treated. Her team here at the Perkins is actually focusing on developing new approaches to target cancers where the prognosis remains poor. And they've got a real thing, I was going to say bee in their bonnet, which will become apparent in a minute, a real bee in their bonnet about personalising breast cancer therapies and actually switching the thinking of how we look at treating cancer to normalise these cancers and make them more sensitive to current treatments. So fingers crossed tech is going to work and we'll be able to get Pilar up for you. But I'd just like to say thank you for your time, thank you for your interest, and thank you for listening to me.
So I'm so sorry I could not attend today. It's just that we are late stages on grant writing. So I live in Rockingham, and anyways, it's great to meet you through the Zoom, and I hope that I can interact with any question you might have. Please feel free to interrupt and to ask me anything. I want to thank Judi and Amelia and all of you, especially the supporters, for helping us on the research. I cannot thank you enough. I think, you know, as Judi has mentioned, obviously federal funding is very difficult in Australia. I think, especially in Western Australia, we're very, very lucky to be at the Perkins. I think that's an incredible, it offers an incredible set of technology, arrays, and techniques to conduct the research. However, realistically, the funding is getting quite difficult at the federal level. And in fact, right now is when we, you know, in a period of a week or two, we have to send all these grants at the same time. So anyways, thank you, all of you, for your contribution. And with the few minutes we have, I just wanted to tell you a bit what, in my view, is needed in terms of research we're conducting at the lab to advance the field of breast cancer. In particular, I work on breast and ovarian, and in my viewpoint, well, obviously targeted therapies are really key here. And well, we've done a very good job in trying to you know, impact survival rates in breast cancer. There is no doubt that that's been massive. The development of in research has been incredible, but we still have those tumors that account for the most mortality, and those are the problem, really. While most of the cancers can be cured, obviously there is the problem of advanced disease. You know, obviously any cancer detected late that's in advanced stage will be really problematic and difficult to treat, no doubt about it. But there is also, you know, tumors that we don't understand very well. And so the objective of the lab is to really look at those tumors and see, can we target these tumors with different agents that are more targeted and more specific, and it will cause probably less of a toxicity, so it will cause less of an impact to patients. So most chemotherapy, so in ovarian cancer, for example, that's just another big area. But really, when you look at the landscape of cancer, really, you have these tumors at advanced stage, which they're really difficult to treat, and in which chemotherapies are, for the most part, ineffective. They're extremely toxic, so they're agents that do not really discriminate between tumor cells and normal cells, which cause an array of toxic effects that are very difficult for patients and for their families. And so in the lab, we've been focused recently on triple negative, and we also looked at recently to a subtype of estrogen receptor positive tumors that usually they should respond to anti-hormonal treatments, but they don't. So in this specific subset cohort of patients, what we observe is a general resistance to anti-estrogen therapy, so tamoxifen, fulvestrant, and all these agents that are used sort of first line clinical as clinical treatment in these patients. And while most of them will respond, actually the mass majority, there is pockets of patients. So there are cohorts of patients that develop resistance, and we were very interested in those patients. And what do they have that in these patients, you know, years later after we got a relapse? And why is that happening? Because there are really no clinical biomarkers. There are no clinical way to really distinguish the patients that are at risk of relapse from the ones that will actually be cured from the disease, right? And so we looked at, for this project that I thought it's really interesting, we looked at a large number of breast cancers, and I was like this morning already investigating the tumor database because we get more and more and more numbers. And so what we found out is that the patients that do not respond to anti-estrogen therapy they have a group of genes in chromosome 11, which are what we call amplified, so they are repeated. So they're found in multiple copies. And we spent, since I came to UWA from the US, we spent about 8 years identifying what are those genes and what do they do, because we thought, well, maybe that is the key to try to not only identify these patients at risk, but to find novel therapies. And we came across an exciting finding, which is a new gene that sits really on the peak of the amplification. So that means that it was the most frequently amplified or repeated gene within that piece of the chromosome. And then in collaboration with Pathwest and oncologists here at Perkins, you probably know Andy Redfern. He's been a collaborator of my lab for many years now. So we developed a test that really is a really simple test to look at the amplification. So the number of copies of these genes in the breast cancers. And we looked at hundreds of breast cancers. We scanned them for the presence of this gene. And what we are finding is that indeed this new gene might be an indicator of resistance to anti-estrogens. And we've been looking, even now, we were really looking at the how we can use this test, which is very simple. It's exactly the same that we're using to detect the HER2 breast cancers, for example. What we could actually question is, can we identify them? Question number two, can we target more effectively these tumors, because they're very difficult to treat. So after 8 years of really work in the lab, we discovered that the role of this gene is to activate survival. So you kind of have to imagine this gene as being a survival asset to the tumors. And usually when cells are placed in what we call starvation conditions, that means there is no nutrients around the tumor, the tumors, well, the normal cells will respond into not proliferating. So basically they will stay, in a state of inhibiting a cellular proliferation or cellular division. And this is because there is no nutrients around, there is no hormones, there is no stimulators. The tumors decide, the normal cells. I have a problem, and I tell you who is the problem. I'll show you. Come here. Here we go. So she might be actually writing a little, barking a little bit. This is Luella, and she writes all my grants. So so the question is, normal cells, what happens is that they will they will have a proliferation state that's controlled. It's based on the availability of nutrients. So the more nutrients, then the cell will respond, actually, proliferating and dividing. However, in tumor cells, the tumor cells that do have the amplification, in which the gene is present in multiple repeats, what's happening is that that gene will act as a survival kit, and it will promote proliferation regardless of whether the tumor is placed under proper nutrient status or presence of estrogen, all these basically proliferative signals. So the presence of this gene, what it does is makes the tumor proliferate independently of the status of the nutrients around the tumor. So it's activating the metabolism of the breast cancers to promote survival. And we done a lot of work to dissect what the gene is doing, but what we found out is that we could treat these breast cancers with a drug that's already available, and that's in the lines of what Judi was mentioning before. There are many drugs that are available for breast cancers, and one of those drugs actually sits in the pathway, or blocks one of the pathways that this oncogene is, by which this oncogene is activating cell growth. So we can now, the idea is that we can target these patients that have that gene amplification with these drugs that already exist. And there are many of these drugs available. So the idea is that we can match the patient with a drug that's already there. And that's the sort of the type of work that we're trying to do, which is personalized medicine, is like really look at cancers at the level of what is promoting the growth of these cancers and why, and then better design drugs to target these patients. Because of the pathway, the nature of the pathway and the discovery of which genes and which components are involved, we can actually also try to identify better drugs, so better inhibitors that will block this pathway. And that the idea is that these inhibitors will be a lot less toxic than the chemotherapy that will target basically any single dividing cell will be targeted by chemotherapy. So this is one of the projects that we are looking at, and we're very excited about this. So these models are here at the Perkins, and we have preclinical models where we can test these new compounds, these new series of targeted compounds, and assess whether the resistance can be reverted. So that's one of the projects that we've been doing. Another project in breast cancer, you're probably familiar with the venom work. The venom work was done by a student of mine, Chiara Duffy. She did the PhD with me, and that work pretty much went all over the world. It was quite interesting. So we were just testing whether the presence of venom or the venom could influence the growth of particular types of breast cancer. And what Chiara has found, so she isolated the venom here from UWA. They have a really very good colony here, very pure, very much isolated from the rest. These bees are pretty much pathogen-free, and they have a very special colony here at UW where Chiara had access to. And then she took the venom from those bees and studied the impact of the venom in the growth of proliferation of these breast cancers. And she found out that the triple negative subtype and next the HER2 subtype were the ones most affected by the venom. And we characterized the effects of the venom across these types of breast cancers, and we looked at the mechanisms. And so the idea of this project is that there is a little component in the venom that's called melittin, and that's in a small peptide. So it's a really tiny peptide present in relatively high amounts in the venom. And we can produce the peptide here, relatively easy, can be synthetically produced and modified. And so the idea that we are having is modifying this peptide to better target the peptide into the tumors. Then the other aspect, of course, going back to what Judi mentioned, is the idea of using melittin as a therapeutic for these breast cancers. We can also potentiate the effect of the chemotherapy. This is just due to the fact that the melittin does little pores, opens little pores in the membrane of these cancer cells, facilitating the entrance of the chemotherapy. So it's a really important finding, just because not many drugs actually reach the tumor effectively. So the use of melittin in combination with agents that they're already being used for the treatment of these breast cancers will be extremely attractive. And those are the two main projects. I'm sorry, I probably talked too much, but I hope that if you have any any questions, please let me know. Those are the most, important, I will say, the top 2 projects that we're doing in the lab. We do have others, in particular in ovarian, but those are the ones that Judi told me more or less to explain. And if you have any questions, let me know. And also, again, I want to thank you, all of you, for your support and making this research here at the Perkins possible. So thank you so much for that.